The sound of her voice stopped Dawson Cooper in his tracks, his hand frozen on the barn door as the melody drifted through the late afternoon air of Republic, Kansas, carrying a sweetness that seemed to soften the harsh prairie wind of 1877. He had come to the Johnson Ranch to discuss purchasing breeding stock, but the song pulled him forward with an inexplicable urgency that made his chest tighten in ways he did not quite understand. Peering through the slats of the calving pen, he saw her kneeling in the straw, cradling a newborn calf against her worn cotton dress, singing a lullaby so tender it might have been meant for a human child. The calf's mother stood nearby, calm and trusting, as if she too understood the magic in the young woman's voice. Dawson knew he should announce himself, knew it was improper to watch a lady unaware, but something held him transfixed. The woman's honey-colored hair had escaped its pins, falling in waves around her face as she stroked the calf's damp fur. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had known both joy and sorrow, each note perfectly pitched yet filled with a raw emotion that spoke to something deep within him. She sang of stars and moonlight, of prairie grass dancing in the wind, of safety and warmth and home. The calf's dark eyes began to droop, its breathing steadying as it relaxed into her arms. "Hush now, little one," she murmured between verses, her speaking voice as gentle as her singing. "Your mama's right here. You are safe and loved, and tomorrow you will run in the sunshine with legs strong enough to carry you anywhere you wish to go." Dawson felt his throat constrict. He was 24 years old, had broken wild horses, driven cattle through storms that would terrify most men, and built a small ranch from nothing but determination and sweat. He had never considered himself a romantic man, had always assumed he would marry eventually out of practical necessity, rather than passion. But standing there, watching this stranger comfort a newborn calf with such devotion, he felt something shift inside him like a key turning in a lock he had not known existed. The calf's mother lowed softly, and the young woman looked up, her face brightening. "There now, see. She is calling for you. You should go to her." She stood carefully, steadying the wobbly calf on its feet and guiding it toward its mother. The reunion was instant and instinctive, the calf butting its head against the cow's udder, while the mother began to lick her baby clean with long, patient strokes. Dawson chose that moment to step back and knock loudly on the barn's exterior wall, calling out, "Hello, Mr. Johnson." The young woman startled, her hand flying to her chest as she spun to face the doorway. Dawson entered slowly, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Up close, he could see that her eyes were the color of spring grass, bright and alive despite the exhaustion that shadowed her features. Straw clung to her skirt, and there was a smear of something he preferred not to identify on her sleeve, but she carried herself with a dignity that seemed utterly natural. "Mr. Johnson is in the house," she said, her voice cautious but not unfriendly. "I can fetch him for you if your business is urgent. I apologize for startling you, miss. I am Dawson Cooper. Your father is expecting me to discuss livestock." A flicker of something crossed her face, too quick for him to identify. "He is not my father, Mr. Cooper. I am Grace Ashford, the hired help. But yes, Mr. Johnson mentioned you would be coming by today. I lost track of time with this little one." She gestured toward the calf, which was now nursing contentedly. First birth of the season is always special. Dawson found himself struggling for words, an unusual occurrence for a man who prided himself on straightforward communication. "I heard you singing. It was beautiful." The calf seemed to take great comfort from it. Grace's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked away. "Animals respond to kindness, Mr. Cooper. A gentle voice can soothe them when they are frightened or in pain. I have found it helps during difficult births, and when the babies are finding their legs. You sing to all the livestock. The question came out before Dawson could consider whether it was appropriate. When they need it, Grace replied simply. Now, if you will excuse me, I should let Mr. Johnson know you have arrived. She moved past him toward the door, and Dawson caught the faint scent of lavender mixed with hay and honest work. It was intoxicating. Miss Ashford, he heard himself say, his voice rougher than intended. Would you permit me to call on you sometime, perhaps after Sunday services? Grace stopped, her hand on the doorframe, and turned to look at him fully for the first time. He saw surprise in her eyes, followed by something that might have been hope before caution shuttered her expression. That is kind of you to offer, Mr. Cooper, but I should tell you that I am not in a position to entertain social calls. I work from dawn until well after dark most days, and my circumstances are not what most men would consider suitable for courtship. I only asked if I might call on you, Miss Ashford. I am not inquiring about your financial statements or your pedigree, just whether you might enjoy some company now and then. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. You are persistent. My mother always said it was one of my finer qualities, right alongside my stubbornness and my tendency to speak my mind too plainly. Grace laughed then, a sound as clear and sweet as her singing. Very well, Mr. Cooper. If you wish to waste your Sunday afternoons, I will not stop you. You can find me here, as I live in the room above this barn. Before Dawson could respond, she was gone, her footsteps quick and light on the hard, packed earth. He stood alone in the barn, his hat still clutched in his hands, wondering what madness had possessed him. He had known this woman for all of 5 minutes, yet every instinct he possessed insisted that his life had just changed direction as surely as a river diverted by a fallen tree. Frank Johnson emerged from the house moments later, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a firmer handshake. They discussed cattle prices and bloodlines, inspected the breeding stock, and negotiated terms that would benefit them both. Through it all, Dawson's mind kept wandering to the room above the barn, imagining Grace climbing a ladder to whatever small space she called home. She is a hard worker, Johnson said suddenly, following Dawson's gaze toward the barn. Showed up here 6 months ago, half-starved and desperate for work. I needed help after my wife passed, and Grace needed a roof over her head. She has earned her keep 10 times over. Got away with the animals I have never seen before. How did she come to be in such circumstances? Dawson asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Johnson shrugged. Never asked for the full story. Something about her father dying and leaving debts. The creditors took everything, including her home. She has no family left, nowhere to go. But she is respectable, if that is what you are wondering. Works hard. Keeps to herself, never causes trouble. Dawson nodded, filing this information away. A woman alone in the world faced dangers and difficulties most men never had to consider. That Grace had survived and maintained her dignity spoke to a strength of character he deeply respected. He completed his business with Johnson and arranged for the cattle to be delivered the following week. As he mounted his horse for the ride back to his own ranch, he glanced once more at the barn. Grace stood in the doorway of the calving pen, her attention on the new mother and calf. She did not look his way, but Dawson felt the connection between them like a physical cord, drawing tight across the distance. The days, until Sunday, stretched long and restless. Dawson found himself distracted during routine tasks, his thoughts returning again and again to green eyes and a voice that could gentle wild things. His ranch foreman, an older man named Pete who had worked cattle across 3 states, noticed his preoccupation and commented on it with typical bluntness. You have got the look of a man who has been kicked by a mule and is too stubborn to admit it hurts. Pete observed as they mended fence on Thursday afternoon. "What has got you so twisted up?" "Nothing that concerns you," Dawson replied, stretching wire tight before securing it to the post. "A woman, then. Always is when a man gets that particular stupid expression on his face." Pete hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "Anyone I know, Grace Ashford. She works for Frank Johnson." Pete whistled low. "The one living in his barn, boss, you sure about that?" "Pretty girl, I will grant you, but she has got no family, no dowry, nothing to bring to a marriage." "I am not proposing marriage," Dawson said, though even as the words left his mouth he wondered if that was entirely true. "I only asked to call on her." "And when you call on a woman, you are considering a future with her. That is how these things work." Pete set down his hammer and fixed Dawson with a serious look. "I am not saying do not do it. I am saying make sure you are thinking clearly. Love can make a man foolish, and foolish men make poor decisions." "Did you love your wife?" Dawson asked. Pete rarely spoke of his past, but it was common knowledge he had been married once, long ago. "More than my own life," Pete said quietly. "Still do, even though she has been gone 15 years. But we met proper like, had families to guide us, did things the right way. This girl, she has got no one to look out for her interests. You need to be respectful of that, treat her honorable." "I intend to treat her with the utmost respect," Dawson said firmly. "That is why I asked permission to call on her rather than just showing up unannounced." Pete nodded slowly. "Good. Just remember that she is vulnerable, whether she shows it or not. A woman alone in this world has got precious few choices. Do not take advantage of that." The conversation stayed with Dawson through the remaining days. He found himself taking extra care with his appearance on Sunday morning, shaving carefully and putting on his best shirt. The small church in Republic was filled with familiar faces, ranchers and farmers and shopkeepers who made up the community. Dawson scanned the pews looking for Grace, finally spotting her near the back, sitting alone. She wore a dress of pale blue cotton, obviously old and mended in places, but clean and pressed. Her hair was pinned up properly, revealing the graceful line of her neck. When she noticed him looking, she offered a small smile that made his heart beat faster. After the service, Dawson made his way through the crowd of neighbors exchanging news and gossip. Grace had stepped outside, standing slightly apart from the clusters of families. He approached her carefully, aware of the curious glances from those around them. "Miss Ashford," he said, offering a slight bow. "Might I walk you back to the Johnson place?" "That is kind of you, Mr. Cooper, but it is quite a distance. I usually ride in the wagon with Mr. Johnson. I brought my buggy. There is plenty of room, and I promise to be a perfect gentleman." Frank Johnson appeared at Grace's elbow, looking between them with shrewd assessment. "Go on, girl. It will save me the trip, and Cooper here seems decent enough. Just make sure you are back in time for the evening feeding." Grace's expression flickered with something that might have been embarrassment at the reminder of her working status, but she lifted her chin and said, "Yes, sir. I will not be late." Dawson helped her into the buggy, acutely aware of how small her hand felt in his and how little she must weigh beneath that worn dress. They set off down the dusty road, the spring sunshine warm on their shoulders. For several minutes, neither spoke. Dawson found himself uncharacteristically nervous, searching for the right words. "You have a beautiful voice," he finally said. "Have you always loved music?" "My mother taught me," Grace replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She said that music was the language of the soul, that it could express things words could not reach. She used to sing constantly while she worked. Hymns in the morning, ballads in the afternoon, lullabies at night. She must have been a wonderful woman. She was. She died when I was 12. Fever took her in 3 days. Grace's voice remained steady, but Dawson heard the old pain beneath it. "My father never quite recovered. He loved her desperately, you see. When she died, it was like half of him went into the grave with her. I am sorry. That must have been very difficult for you." Grace nodded. "Father did his best, but he was not made for raising a daughter alone. We managed well enough until the accident last year, a fall from his horse that broke his neck. He died instantly, which the doctor said was a mercy. All I knew was that he was gone, and with him went everything I had known. He had borrowed heavily to expand his freight business, planning to pay it back over time. But with him dead, the creditors came calling. They took the business, the house, everything but the clothes I was wearing and a small trunk of personal items." The matter-of-fact way she recounted this tragedy struck Dawson as infinitely sad. "You had no other family, no one to help you, none. Mother was an only child, and her parents died before I was born. Father had a brother, but they had not spoken in years after some quarrel I never understood. I tried to reach him after Father died, but my letters went unanswered." Grace smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture. "I am telling you this so you will understand my situation, Mr. Cooper. I have nothing to offer beyond my labor and my word. If you are looking for a wife with connections or a dowry, you should look elsewhere." Dawson pulled the buggy to a stop beneath a cottonwood tree, turning to face her fully. "Miss Ashford, I own a ranch that provides me with a comfortable living, but I am no wealthy man. My father was a farmer who saved every penny to buy land, and my mother was a school teacher. I built what I have through hard work, and I value the same in others. I do not care about dowries or connections. I care about character and kindness, and from what I have seen of you, you possess both in abundance." Grace met his eyes, searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was sincere. "You heard me sing to a calf and decided I was worth pursuing. How can you possibly know anything about my character from that?" "Because I saw how you treated a creature that could do nothing for you, that would never thank you or repay you. You gave it comfort simply because it needed comfort. That tells me more about who you are than any letter of recommendation or bank statement ever could." A tear slipped down Grace's cheek before she quickly brushed it away. "You do not know how much I needed to hear something kind today. This week marks a year since Father died, and I have been feeling the weight of it." Without thinking, Dawson reached out and took her hand. It was rough from work, the nails short and practical, but it fit in his as if made to be there. "You are not alone anymore, Grace. Not if you do not want to be." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. "We barely know each other, Dawson." It was the first time she had used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips sent warmth through his chest. "Then let us remedy that. Tell me about yourself. What do you dream of? What makes you laugh? What do you want from life?" Grace smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "I dream of having a home again, a place that is truly mine where I can put down roots. I laugh at the antics of newborn animals. They are so awkward and earnest. And what I want from life is perhaps too simple for most people to understand. I want peace. I want to wake up without fear of what the day might bring. I want to care for things, to nurture them and watch them grow. That does not sound simple to me. It sounds wise." They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily once the initial awkwardness passed. Dawson learned that Grace had helped her father with his bookkeeping and had a quick mind for numbers. She loved to read, but had been forced to sell most of her books to pay debts. She had a deep affection for animals of all kinds and had once nursed an injured hawk back to health, releasing it only when it was strong enough to hunt on its own. In turn, Dawson shared stories of building his ranch, of the challenges and small victories that marked his days. He told her about his parents, who had died within months of each other 3 years prior, leaving him alone in the world. He spoke of his dreams to expand the ranch, to breed horses as well as cattle, to build something lasting that might one day be passed to his own children. "Do you want children?" Grace asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I apologize. That was too forward." "It is a fair question between two people who are considering a future together," Dawson said calmly. "And yes, I do. I want a house full of children, want to teach my sons to ride and work the land, want to watch my daughters grow into strong women." "What about you?" "I want children very much," Grace said softly. "I used to imagine having 4 or 5, enough to fill a home with laughter and love. But given my circumstances, I had resigned myself to the possibility that marriage and family might never be part of my future." "Why would you think that?" "Because most men want a wife who brings something to the marriage beyond herself. Land, money, family connections. I have none of those things. And even the men who might overlook that tend to want a young bride they can mold to their liking. At 22, I am practically a spinster by most standards." Dawson laughed, unable to help himself. 22 is hardly ancient. "And I am 24, which makes me only 2 years your senior. As for the rest, I told you before that I do not care about what you can bring in material terms. You have survived tremendous hardship with your spirit intact. You are kind, hardworking, and intelligent. Those are the qualities that make a good wife and mother, not the size of a bank account." By the time they reached the Johnson ranch, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Dawson helped Grace down from the buggy, reluctant to let her hand go. "Thank you for the ride and the conversation," Grace said. "It has been a long time since I felt so comfortable talking with anyone. May I call on you again? Perhaps next Sunday, or sooner if Mr. Johnson would not mind me visiting during the week. I would like that very much." "But Dawson, you should know that there will be talk. People will wonder why you are interested in the hired girl living in a barn. It may reflect poorly on you. Let them talk. I know the truth, and so do you. That is what matters." Grace squeezed his hand once before releasing it. "You are a good man, Dawson Cooper. I hope I prove worthy of your regard." "You already have," he said simply. He watched her walk toward the barn, her step lighter than when they had first climbed into the buggy. Just before she disappeared inside, she turned and waved. Dawson waved back, feeling a ridiculous grin spread across his face. The following weeks fell into a pattern that became the sweetest part of Dawson's life. He found excuses to visit the Johnson ranch several times a week, timing his arrivals to coincide with Grace's afternoon break or the evening feeding. They would walk together through the pastures, talking about everything and nothing, slowly weaving their lives together through shared stories and dreams. He discovered that Grace had a sharp sense of humor that emerged once she felt comfortable enough to relax her guard. She made him laugh with observations about the chickens' social hierarchy and the absurd stubbornness of Johnson's old mule. She also had strong opinions about everything from politics to pie crust, and was not afraid to debate with him when they disagreed. For her part, Grace seemed to blossom under the steady attention and affection. The shadows that had darkened her eyes began to fade, replaced by a light that made her beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with mere physical appearance. She started to speak about the future with hope rather than resignation, sharing ideas for the garden she would plant one day or the songs she would teach her children. Dawson brought her small gifts, things carefully chosen to show his regard without overstepping propriety. A book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a length of ribbon in a shade of green that matched her eyes, a jar of honey from his own hives. Grace accepted each gift with a gratitude that seemed disproportionate to their small value. and he realized that she was unaccustomed to receiving anything without having to work for it. One evening in early June, Dawson arrived to find Grace in the pasture with a group of calves that had been weaned from their mothers. The young cattle were distressed, calling for the cows they could no longer reach. Grace sat in the grass singing to them, and one by one they began to settle, drawn to the comfort of her voice. Dawson leaned against the fence, content to watch and listen. The song was one he did not recognize, something about rivers and homecomings. Grace's voice soared over the prairie, clear and pure, and Dawson felt his throat tighten with emotion. In that moment, he could see their future with crystalline clarity. Grace heavy with child, singing lullabies to the baby growing inside her. Grace rocking their newborn to sleep while he watched from the doorway, overwhelmed with love. Grace teaching their children the songs her mother had taught her, passing down that gift of gentleness and care. He knew with absolute certainty that he was going to marry this woman. He had known it from the first moment he heard her voice in the barn, but now it was not just an instinct or a hope. It was a simple fact, as undeniable as sunrise. Grace finished her song and looked up to find him watching. She smiled and rose gracefully, brushing grass from her skirt as she walked to meet him. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked. "Long enough to fall even more in love with you," Dawson replied honestly. Grace stopped walking, her eyes wide. "You love me." "With everything I am or ever will be. I know it has only been a few weeks, but Grace, when something is right, time does not matter. You are the missing piece I did not even know I was searching for." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I tried not to, tried to protect my heart by keeping some distance, but it was impossible. You are everything I never dared to dream I might find." Dawson climbed over the fence and strode to her, pulling her into his arms. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked beneath his chin. He could feel her heart beating against his chest, quick and strong. "Marry me," he said into her hair. "I know I should court you longer, should do this properly with a ring and a formal proposal, but I cannot wait. Marry me, Grace. Build a life with me. Let me give you the home and family you want. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." Grace pulled back just enough to look up at him, her face radiant despite the tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. I would marry you tomorrow if it were possible. Then tomorrow it is. We will ride into Republic in the morning and speak to the minister. If he can marry us this week, we will do it. I am tired of saying goodbye to you every evening, tired of sleeping alone knowing you are so close but not truly mine. What about your ranch? What about your work? We cannot just abandon our responsibilities. Pete can manage the ranch for a few days, and I will speak to Johnson tonight, explain the situation. He is a reasonable man. He will understand." They told Frank Johnson over supper, sitting at his worn kitchen table while moths battered against the screen door. The older man listened in silence as Dawson outlined his intentions, his expression unreadable. When Dawson finished, Johnson pushed back from the table and studied them both carefully. "This is sudden," he said finally. "Grace, are you certain about this? You have only known the man a few weeks." "I am more certain of this than anything in my life, sir," Grace replied steadily. "Dawson is a good man, and he loves me. I love him. We do not see any reason to wait." Johnson nodded slowly. "I suppose I cannot argue with that, seeing as how I proposed to my Martha 2 days after meeting her and we had 32 happy years together." He turned to Dawson. "You will take care of her, give her a good home. I will spend every day of my life making sure she has everything she needs and most of what she wants," Dawson promised. "You have my word on that. Then you have my blessing, for what it is worth." Johnson stood and offered his hand to Dawson, sealing the agreement. "Grace, You are welcome to stay in the barn until the wedding. After that, I expect I will have to find new help, but it will be worth it to see you settled and happy." They were married the following Saturday in the small church in Republic. Pete stood as Dawson's witness, and the minister's wife acted as Grace's attendant. Grace wore the same blue dress she had worn to church, but Dawson had surprised her with a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked that morning. Her eyes had filled with tears when he presented them, and she clutched them throughout the brief ceremony as if they were priceless jewels. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson kissed his bride with all the tenderness and passion he possessed. Grace kissed him back with equal fervor, and the small gathering of well-wishers applauded. They rode back to Dawson's ranch in the buggy, Grace's few possessions packed in the trunk he had once carried in happier times. The ranch house was modest, a 4-room structure Dawson had built himself with help from neighbors. It was sturdy and well-maintained, but decidedly masculine in its furnishings and lack of decoration. "I know it is not much," Dawson said as he carried her over the threshold. "But it is sound, and we can make improvements over time. I want you to make it a home, Grace. Change whatever you like. Add whatever touches will make you comfortable." Grace looked around the main room with its simple furniture and bare walls, and her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "It is perfect. It is ours, Dawson. That makes it more beautiful than any mansion could ever be." He set her down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. They were alone together for the first time as husband and wife, and suddenly the air seemed charged with nervous energy. Grace looked up at him, vulnerability and trust mingling in her expression. "I have never," she began, then stopped, color flooding her cheeks. "What I mean is, I do not know exactly how to be a wife in all ways. My mother died before we could have certain conversations, and there was no one else to guide me." Dawson cupped her face gently in his hands. "We will learn together. There is no rush, no expectation beyond what we both want. This is our marriage, Grace. We make our own rules, go at our own pace. All I need is you beside me, however that looks." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "I want to be a true wife to you in every sense. I trust you completely. I simply wanted you to know that I may need patience while I learn." "You will have all the patience in the world," he promised. "And all the love and care I possess." He showed her their bedroom, watching as she ran her hand over the quilt his mother had made years ago. The iron bed frame was simple but solid, the mattress comfortable. Grace set her bouquet on the dresser, then turned to face him. What passed between them that night was tender and slow, a gradual discovery of intimacy that left them both shaken by the depth of emotion it evoked. Dawson had been with women before, brief encounters that had satisfied a physical need but left him empty afterward. This was entirely different. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word of love seemed to bind them together more completely. When Grace cried out his name in the darkness, clinging to him as if he were her anchor in a storm, he felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of what it meant to be truly connected to another person. Afterward they lay tangled together, Grace's head on his chest and his arms wrapped securely around her. He listened to her breathing slow and deepen as she drifted towards sleep, marveling at how natural it felt to hold her this way. "Dawson," Grace murmured drowsily. "Yes, love. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for hearing me sing and having the courage to speak to me that day. You saved my life in ways you cannot possibly understand." "You saved mine too," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I was existing but not really living. You changed everything." Grace tilted her head to look at him, her eyes luminous in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I am going to make you so happy, I promise. You already do. Every moment with you is a gift." She kissed him softly, then settled back against his chest with a contented sigh. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing deep and even. Dawson remained awake longer, his mind too full of gratitude and wonder to rest easily. He had a wife now, a partner to share his life. Someone who would sing to their children, who would gentle their livestock with her voice, who would fill the lonely corners of his home with warmth and love. The first months of marriage brought adjustments and small challenges as they learned to navigate shared life. Grace threw herself into transforming the house, sewing curtains from fabric Dawson bought her in Republic, planting a kitchen garden that promised to yield vegetables by late summer, organizing the chaos of his bachelor existence into something more comfortable and orderly. She also proved to be invaluable around the ranch itself. The horses responded to her voice the way the cattle had, becoming calm and tractable under her care. She helped with the bookkeeping, her neat figures and careful calculations revealing ways they could increase efficiency and reduce costs. And every evening, no matter how hard the day's work had been, she had supper waiting and a smile that made Dawson feel like the most fortunate man alive. Their neighbors accepted Grace readily once they saw how devoted Dawson was to his new wife. The women of Republic welcomed her into their circle, inviting her to quilting bees and church socials. Grace bloomed under the attention and friendship, the last shadows of her difficult past finally fading entirely. In late August, Grace began to feel unwell in the mornings. At first she attributed it to something she had eaten, but when the nausea persisted for more than a week, understanding dawned. She waited until she was certain before telling Dawson, wanting to be sure before giving him such momentous news. She chose an evening when they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Dawson had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, gathering her courage. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. "What is it, love?" "Is something wrong?" Concern immediately colored his voice. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderfully, perfectly right." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, which showed no outward sign of change yet. "We are going to have a baby. You are going to be a father." Dawson went very still, his hand warm against her middle. Then suddenly he was on his feet, pulling her up with him and spinning her around with a whoop of joy that startled the chickens scratching nearby. "A baby? Grace, are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I have missed my courses and the morning sickness is unmistakable. I think the baby will come in late March or early April." Dawson pulled her close, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You have made me the happiest man in Kansas, in the whole country. A baby, our child." He placed his hand on her stomach again, wonder in his expression. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Grace said, reaching up to touch his face. "Our children will be so loved, so cherished. They will grow up knowing they are wanted and valued." "Children," Dawson repeated, catching on her plural usage. "You think there will be more after this one?" "I hope so. I want that house full of laughter we talked about, 4 or 5 children, maybe even 6 if we are blessed." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, trying to pour all his love and gratitude into the embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Dawson made a visible effort to compose himself. "You need to rest more. No more heavy lifting. We will hire someone to help with the housework." "Whatever you need, Grace, anything at all." She laughed, the sound full of affection. "Dawson, I am pregnant, not ill. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still managing their households. I will be careful, I promise, but I do not intend to spend the next 7 months as an invalid." They compromised, Grace agreeing to reduce her work around the ranch while Dawson agreed not to treat her like she might break at any moment. As the weeks passed and her body began to change, Dawson found himself even more in awe of his wife. She carried their child with grace and good humor, even when her back ached and her feet swelled. She sang constantly, lullabies and happy songs that she assured him the baby could hear and would recognize after birth. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Dawson read everything he could find about childbirth and infant care, determined to be prepared for whatever might come. He converted the small room off their bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle from oak wood, and sanding it smooth so no splinter could possibly harm delicate baby skin. Grace sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her hands never idle during the long winter evenings. The baby came on a cold night in early April, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Grace's labor began just after sunset, and Dawson rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife from Republic, pushing his horse harder than he ever had before. By the time they returned, Grace's contractions were coming hard and fast, and she gripped Dawson's hand with surprising strength as the midwife examined her. "First babies usually take their time, but this one is in a hurry," the midwife announced. "Father, you can stay if you like, but you will have to keep out of the way and follow my instructions." Dawson had no intention of leaving Grace to face this ordeal alone. He stayed by her side through the long hours of labor, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement, holding her when the pain overwhelmed her ability to remain stoic. "I cannot do this," Grace gasped at one point, exhausted and frightened. "It hurts too much. I cannot." "Yes, you can," Dawson said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know. You have survived so much, overcome so many obstacles. You can do this, Grace. Bring our baby into the world. I am right here with you. You are not alone." Grace squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face, and bore down with all her remaining strength. Minutes later, a baby's cry split the air, thin and outraged and absolutely perfect. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A fine, healthy boy." Dawson felt his knees go weak with relief. Grace held out her arms, and the midwife placed the baby on her chest. Their son had a shock of dark hair and lungs that suggested he would never have trouble making his needs known. Grace cradled him gently, tears of joy replacing those of pain as she examined every tiny finger and toe. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Hello, my beautiful boy. I am your mama and this is your papa, and we love you so much already." Dawson reached out with a trembling hand to touch his son's head, overwhelmed by the reality of this new life they had created. "He is perfect. Grace, you did so well. I am so proud of you." The midwife cleaned up efficiently, showing Dawson how to help the baby latch for his first feeding, offering instructions for the coming days. By the time she left at dawn, Grace was exhausted but happy, the baby asleep in her arms. "What should we name him?" she asked Dawson, who sat on the edge of the bed, unable to stop staring at his son. "I was thinking Daniel after my father. Daniel Samuel Cooper, with the Samuel for your father." Grace's eyes filled with fresh tears. "That is perfect. Daniel Samuel, our Danny." She looked down at the sleeping baby. "Your grandfather Cooper was a good man, Danny. He would have loved you so much. And your grandfather Ashford, he would have spoiled you terribly. We will tell you all about them as you grow." Over the following weeks, they settled into the exhausting but wonderful routine of new parenthood. Danny proved to be a colicky baby, crying inconsolably for hours each evening. Nothing seemed to help until Grace began to sing to him, the same lullabies she had sung to the calves in Frank Johnson's barn. Her voice never failed to soothe their son, and Dawson would watch them together, his heart so full it seemed impossible that one person could contain so much love. "I knew it would be like this," he said one night, standing in the nursery doorway as Grace rocked Danny to sleep. "The first time I saw you singing to that calf, I knew you would sing our children to sleep exactly like this." Grace looked up, smiling. "Did you really? Did you know even then that you wanted this with me? I knew that I had found something precious and rare, and that I would be a fool to let you go. Best decision I ever made, walking into that barn." As Danny grew from infant to baby to toddler, he proved to be a happy, curious child with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn determination. He loved animals and showed Grace's same gentle touch with them, sitting in the pasture singing to the calves in his piping voice, much to his parents' delight. When Danny was 2 years old, Grace became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, leaving her more tired and uncomfortable. Dawson worried constantly, but Grace insisted she was fine, just busy keeping up with an active toddler while growing another baby. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Rose, arrived on a summer morning with far less drama than her brother's birth. She was smaller and quieter, studying the world with solemn, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Danny adored his baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly, and singing her the songs Grace had taught him. 2 years after Emma came another son, James Thomas, who emerged into the world screaming and never quite stopped. He was louder and more rambunctious than either of his siblings, into everything, fearless to the point of giving his parents heart attacks on a regular basis. But he had a sweet nature beneath the chaos, and his laughter could light up even the darkest day. Grace proved to be every bit the mother Dawson had known she would be. She was patient and kind, but also firm when necessary, teaching their children right from wrong with gentle consistency. She sang to them constantly, soothing hurts and fears, celebrating joys and victories. The house rang with music and laughter, exactly as they had hoped. Dawson expanded the ranch over the years, buying adjacent land as it became available, building up his herd and establishing a reputation for quality stock. The work was hard, but he loved coming home each evening to his growing family, loved sitting at a supper table full of children talking over each other, loved falling into bed beside Grace at the end of each day. When Emma was 5 and begging for a baby sister, Grace discovered she was pregnant once more. She was 31 now, and this pregnancy felt different from the start. She was more tired, more sick, the baby seeming to sap her energy in ways the others had not. The midwife examined her carefully when Grace finally admitted her concerns. "You are carrying twins," she announced after a thorough examination. "That explains the size and the exhaustion. 2 babies take more out of a mother than one. Twins." Dawson felt panic and joy in equal measure. Grace already struggled to rest enough with 3 active children. How would she manage 2 more? But Grace took the news with her characteristic calm acceptance. "Twins," she said, placing her hands on her swollen belly. "2 more blessings. We will manage, Dawson. We always do." They hired a girl from town to help with the housework and the children, giving Grace time to rest as the pregnancy progressed. In late autumn, as the leaves turned gold and the air carried the first hint of winter, Grace went into labor. The twins, another boy and another girl, were born within 20 minutes of each other. The boy came first, lusty and loud. The girl followed, smaller and more delicate, but with a strong will that was immediately apparent when she refused to nurse until she was good and ready. They named them Matthew James and Lily Grace. Danny, now 7, took his role as oldest sibling very seriously, helping to fetch diapers and entertaining his younger siblings while Grace nursed the twins. Emma appointed herself Lily's special protector, and even while James seemed to understand that he needed to be gentler around the babies. The house overflowed with life and love and chaos. Some days Grace looked exhausted beyond words, her hair escaping its pins and baby spit up on her dress. But she was happy. Dawson could see it in her eyes, in the way she smiled at their children, in the contentment that radiated from her even in the midst of mayhem. They were sitting on the porch one evening after the children were finally asleep, the twins 2 months old and beginning to sleep for longer stretches. Grace leaned against Dawson's shoulder, her hand in his. "You remember the day we met?" she asked softly. "When you found me singing to that calf. I remember thinking that I had just met the woman I was going to marry. I remember being absolutely certain, even though it made no logical sense." "I thought you were mad," Grace admitted with a laugh. "When you asked to call on me, I could not imagine why someone like you would be interested in someone like me." "Someone like you," Dawson repeated. "You mean someone kind, intelligent, hardworking, and beautiful." "Yes, I cannot imagine why I would want that." Grace swatted his arm playfully. "You know what I meant. I had nothing, was nothing, just a hired girl living in a barn. You were never nothing, Grace. You were everything, even when you did not know it yet." He pulled her closer. "Look at what we have built together. 5 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, a life full of love and purpose. I could not have done any of this without you." "We did it together," Grace corrected. "Everything we have, we built side by side. As their children grew, the ranch grew with them." Danny showed a natural aptitude for working with the horses and spent hours with his father learning the business. Emma loved the cattle and had her mother's way with them, able to calm even the most skittish cow. James was still too young to be much help, but his enthusiasm made up for his lack of skill. The twins were toddling now, getting into everything with the single-minded determination of 2-year-olds. Grace still sang, her voice a constant presence in their home and around the ranch. She sang while she cooked, while she worked in her garden, while she rocked fussy children to sleep. The animals still responded to her the way they always had, following the sound of her voice, calming at her touch. One spring morning when the twins were 3, Grace woke feeling unwell. She attributed it to something she had eaten, but when the nausea persisted, a familiar suspicion took hold. At 35, she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but nature, it seemed, had other plans. She told Dawson that evening, watching his face cycle through surprise, concern, and finally joy. "Another baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Are you happy about this, Grace? I know 5 is already a handful." "I am happy," she assured him. "Surprised, certainly. A bit worried about managing with the others still so young. But yes, happy. Every one of our children has been a blessing. This one will be too." Their 6th child, a daughter named Sarah Ann, arrived in late November just before Thanksgiving. She was a calm baby, content to watch her older siblings with quiet interest, rarely fussing except when hungry or tired. The older children adored her, taking turns holding her and singing her the lullabies they had learned from their mother. Dawson looked around their supper table that Thanksgiving, counting heads and feeling overwhelmed by gratitude. 6 children, all healthy and happy. Grace beside him, tired but glowing with contentment. A home filled with love and laughter. A life richer than anything he had imagined possible. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, by small triumphs and occasional setbacks. Danny grew into a young man who was his father's right hand on the ranch. Emma blossomed into a beautiful girl with her mother's compassion and strength. James channeled his wild energy into work and became a tireless laborer. The twins developed distinct personalities, Matthew thoughtful and serious, Lily spirited and adventurous. Little Sarah was the baby of the family, sweet-natured and beloved by all. When Grace turned 40, Dawson threw her a party that brought together neighbors from miles around. The house overflowed with people, food, music, and laughter. Watching his wife move through the crowd, greeting friends and accepting good wishes, Dawson marveled at how she had become the heart of their community. Everyone knew Grace's kindness, had experienced her generosity, or benefited from her wisdom. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had departed and the children were helping with cleanup, Dawson found Grace standing on the porch, looking out over the ranch that had become their shared legacy. "What are you thinking?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "I am thinking about how far we have come. When I was living in Frank Johnson's barn, sleeping on a straw mattress and wondering if I would ever have a real home again, I could never have imagined this." She gestured to encompass the house, the land, the family inside. "You gave me everything I dreamed of and so much more." "We gave it to each other," Dawson corrected gently. "I was just a lonely rancher going through the motions of living before I found you. You brought light and love into my life, Grace. You made everything better, brighter, more meaningful." She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. Time had marked them both, silver threading through their hair, lines appearing around their eyes and mouths. But to Dawson, Grace was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her singing to that calf. "I love you," she said simply. "After all these years, through everything we have experienced together, my love for you only grows deeper." "And mine for you," he replied, kissing her softly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Cooper. My wife, my partner, the mother of my children, the keeper of my heart." From inside the house came the sound of their children laughing at something, the noise bright and joyful. Grace smiled against Dawson's lips. "We should go in. The children will need help finishing the cleanup. Let them manage on their own for a few more minutes. I want to stand here with my wife and count my blessings." They remained on the porch as darkness fell over the prairie, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. From the barn came the whinny of horses settling for the night. And from inside their home came the sound of their children, their voices rising in song as they worked. Grace's gift of music passed down to the next generation. Dawson thought back to that day 17 years ago when he had walked into Frank Johnson's barn and heard a voice that stopped him in his tracks. He had known in that instant that his life was about to change, though he could never have predicted the depth and breadth of that transformation. Finding Grace singing to calves, seeing the tenderness with which she cared for helpless creatures, he had recognized the heart of a woman who would love their children with that same devotion. He had been right. Grace had sung their babies to sleep, had comforted their tears, had nurtured their growth with patience and wisdom. She had filled their home with music and love, had been the steady center around which their family revolved. And she had loved him, Dawson, with a faithfulness and passion that never wavered even through the challenges and changes that life brought. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" "For saying yes when I asked to call on you. For marrying me. For building this life with me. For loving me. For everything, Grace. Thank you for everything." She squeezed him tight, her answer clear without words. They stood together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and had created something beautiful from their union. 6 children, a thriving ranch, a love story that had started with a song and had grown into a symphony. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. Grandchildren would come eventually, another generation to fill their home with joy. The ranch would continue to grow and prosper. But the foundation would always be this, the love between a cowboy and the woman he had found singing lullabies to calves. The woman he had known would sing their children to sleep, and she had. She still did. And she always would, because that was who Grace was at her core. A woman whose love expressed itself through gentle care, through patient teaching, through songs that soothed and comforted and healed. Dawson Cooper had many things to be proud of in his life. The ranch he had built, the reputation he had earned, the contributions he had made to his community. But his greatest achievement, the thing that made him proudest, was being Grace's husband. Loving her, being loved by her, walking beside her through all the days of his life. That night, as they finally went inside to join their children, as Grace's voice rose in harmony with the others, Dawson sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for unexpected blessings, for a voice singing in a barn that had called him to his destiny. For Grace, always and forever Grace, the love of his life and the keeper of his soul. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic rescues. It was quieter than that, built on daily choices to love and support each other, to build something lasting together, to create a family founded on respect and affection. But it was no less powerful for its simplicity. In fact, the simple faithfulness of their love made it all the more remarkable. Years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew and eventually began to leave home, though they never strayed far. Danny married a local girl and started his own spread on land Dawson helped him purchase. Emma wed a kind young man who had no experience with ranching, but was eager to learn. Even Wild James settled down eventually, marrying and taking over the horse breeding operation. The twins, Matthew and Lily, remained at home longer, Matthew to help his aging father with the ranch, Lily because she was in no hurry to leave her mother's side. Little Sarah, the baby of the family, grew into a young woman with her mother's voice and her father's business sense, a combination that promised great things for her future. Through it all, Grace remained the heart of the family. She was grandmother to Danny and Emma's children now, singing the same lullabies to her grandchildren that she had sung to her own babies. Her hair had gone silver, her hands bore the marks of years of hard work, but her voice remained clear and true, still capable of calming fussy infants and skittish animals alike. Dawson, now in his 60s, had slowed down considerably. The hard work of ranching had taken its toll on his body, and he relied more heavily on his sons and hired hands to keep things running. But he could still be found each evening on the porch with Grace, holding her hand and watching the sun set over land they had worked together for more than 4 decades. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked him one evening, the question coming from nowhere in particular. "Not a single one," Dawson replied without hesitation. "I have lived exactly the life I wanted to live with exactly the person I wanted to live it with. How many people can say that? Not many, I would imagine." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "I certainly never thought I would be one of them. When I was living in that barn, I had resigned myself to a solitary life. And then you walked in and everything changed. Best day of my life, hearing you sing to that calf." "You have told me that story 100 times," Grace said fondly. "How you knew the moment you heard me that you were going to marry me. Because it is true. Some things you just know deep in your bones. That was one of them." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of companionship. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. Cattle grazed in the distance. Horses moved in the pasture. Chickens scratched in the yard. The sound of children's laughter floated from Danny's house across the way, where he and his wife were raising their own brood. "I want you to promise me something," Grace said suddenly, her voice serious. "Anything? When I am gone, do not mourn too long. Live your life, Dawson. Be happy. Our children will need you." "Grace, no, let me finish. We are neither of us young anymore. One of us will go first, and we both know you are stronger than I am. You will outlive me." "I cannot imagine my life without you in it," Dawson said roughly. "Do not ask me to." "I am not asking you to imagine it. I am asking you to promise that when that day comes, you will not give up. You will keep going for our children and grandchildren. You will remember the good years we had and be grateful for them instead of bitter that they ended." Dawson pulled her close, his throat tight. "I promise. But you are not allowed to leave me for a very long time yet. We have more grandchildren to spoil and more sunsets to watch together." "I will do my best," Grace assured him. "I am quite content right here, thank you very much. But life has its own timeline, indifferent to human wishes and plans." 2 years later, Grace fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. She fought it bravely, but at 64, her body could not overcome the infection. Surrounded by her husband and children, with her grandchildren's drawings covering the walls of her bedroom, Grace slipped away on a cold February morning. Dawson held her hand as she took her last breath, his tears falling silently. Their children wept openly, the house that had always been full of music now silent except for the sounds of grief. They buried her in the small cemetery outside Republic, under a cottonwood tree with a view of the prairie she had loved. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the impact Grace had made on all who knew her. Person after person shared stories of her kindness, her wisdom, her gift for making everyone feel valued and heard. Dawson stood at the graveside, his children around him, and felt as if half of himself had been buried with his wife. How was he supposed to continue without her? How could he face each day knowing she would not be there beside him? But he had made her a promise, and Dawson Cooper was a man who kept his word. So he got up each morning, even when the bed felt impossibly empty. He ate the meals his daughters prepared, even when food tasted like ash. He went through the motions of living, waiting for the day when it would feel less like acting and more like actual life again. The ranch became his salvation. Working with the animals, riding across land he and Grace had built together, gave him purpose when grief threatened to overwhelm him. And his grandchildren, those beautiful reminders of the love he and Grace had shared, pulled him back from the edge of despair time and again. One spring evening, about a year after Grace's death, Dawson found himself in the calving barn. A first-time mother was struggling, and he had come to help. After a difficult labor, the calf was finally born, wet and wobbly and perfect. The new mother was anxious, unsure what to do with this creature she had just brought into the world. Without thinking, Dawson began to sing. The lullaby that Grace had sung so many times, the one he had first heard her singing that day they met. His voice was rough and unpracticed, nowhere near as beautiful as hers had been. But it had the desired effect. The cow calmed and the calf began to nurse. Dawson felt tears streaming down his face as he sang, the words bringing Grace back to him with painful clarity. He could see her as she had been that day, young and lovely, her voice soaring. He could see her singing to their newborn children, her face radiant with love. He could see her teaching their grandchildren the same songs, passing down that gift of gentleness. She was gone, but the legacy of her love remained. In their children and grandchildren. In the ranch they had built together. In the community she had touched with her kindness. And in the songs she had taught them all, melodies that would be passed down through generations. Dawson finished the lullaby and wiped his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty barn, to Grace wherever she might be. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for the life we built. Thank you for teaching me what love really means." He returned to the house as dawn broke over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Danny was already up, starting coffee in the kitchen. "You were out early," his son observed. "Everything all right?" "Johnson's cow had her calf. Both are doing fine." Dawson poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table where he had shared so many meals with Grace. "I sang to them, that lullaby your mother always used." Danny smiled. "I bet Mother would have liked that. She always said you had a nice voice when you finally used it. She was biased. She loved you. Of course she was biased." Danny joined him at the table. "Father, I have been thinking. Sarah is getting married next month and Emma is expecting again. Life continues, you know. Mother would not want us to stop living because she is gone." "I know. I am trying, Danny. Some days are easier than others. That is all anyone can ask. Just keep trying one day at a time." Danny squeezed his father's shoulder. "Mother loved you so much. She told me once that finding you was like finding the missing piece of her soul. She never regretted a single day of your life together. Neither did I. Not one day, not one moment." Dawson looked out the window at the land he and Grace had worked so hard to build. "We had something special, your mother and I. The kind of love people write songs about. You did. And you gave that love to all of us. Every one of your children and grandchildren knows what real love looks like because of you and Mother. That is a gift beyond price." Dawson lived another 10 years, long enough to see more grandchildren born and even a few great-grandchildren. He took comfort in family, in work, in the rhythms of ranch life. The grief of losing Grace never fully disappeared, but it transformed over time from a sharp, debilitating pain to a duller ache of missing what had been. On a warm summer evening in his 75th year, Dawson sat on the porch watching the sun set. He had been feeling tired lately, ready for rest. Danny and Matthew ran the ranch now, his sons capable and competent. His daughters visited often with their families. He was surrounded by love, but he missed Grace with an intensity that had not diminished with time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Dawson closed his eyes. He could almost hear Grace's voice singing, clear and sweet. The same lullaby she had been singing the day they met, the one she had sung to their children, the one he had learned from her and now taught his grandchildren. He drifted off to sleep there on the porch, his weathered hands folded in his lap. When Danny came to check on him an hour later, he was gone, a peaceful expression on his face. They buried Dawson beside Grace in the cemetery outside Republic. Their children and grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, sharing memories of a love that had shaped all their lives. The minister spoke of commitment and faithfulness, of building something lasting through daily choices to love and honor one another. But the most moving part of the service came at the end, when all the grandchildren gathered around the grave and sang the lullaby Grace had made famous in their family. Their voices rose in harmony, young and clear, carrying across the prairie. And those who heard them said it was the most beautiful thing they had ever experienced, a perfect tribute to a woman who had given so much love through her music, and to the man who had loved her faithfully for more than 4 decades. The ranch passed to Danny, who ran it with the same integrity and dedication his father had shown. Emma and her husband settled nearby, raising their own children on the land. James built up the horse operation until it was known across 3 states. The twins both married and had families, staying close to home. Sarah and her husband bought a neighboring property and started their own ranch. Grace and Dawson's legacy lived on in every one of their descendants. The value of hard work, the importance of kindness, the power of faithful love. These lessons passed from generation to generation, shaping who they became and how they moved through the world. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was the music. Every child born into that family learned the lullabies Grace had sung, the songs she had used to gentle animals and soothe crying babies. They sang to their own children and grandchildren, passing down not just the melodies but the love that had inspired them. On the ranch where Dawson and Grace had built their life together, where they had raised 6 children and weathered all the storms that 4 decades of marriage could bring, the sound of singing still filled the air. New voices learned old songs. Young hands worked land that had fed multiple generations. Babies were rocked to sleep with lullabies that had comforted their great-grandparents. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, those who lived there swore they could hear 2 voices harmonizing. A man and a woman, singing together the way they had in life, the way they would throughout eternity. Grace's voice clear and true, Dawson's rougher but no less loving, blending into a melody that spoke of enduring love and unshakable commitment. It was a fitting end to a story that had begun with a cowboy hearing a young woman sing lullabies to calves and knowing with certainty that she would sing their children to sleep. He had been right, and so much more. Grace had not only sung their children to sleep, but had filled their entire lives with music, with love, with joy. Their story was complete now, every chapter written, every promise kept. From that first moment in Frank Johnson's barn to their final rest side by side in Republic Cemetery, Dawson and Grace had lived a love story for the ages. Not because it was filled with drama or grand gestures, but because it was real and true and lasting. They had chosen each other every day, through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, in sickness and health. And in the end, that daily choice to love and be loved created something more powerful and enduring than any fleeting passion could. It created a legacy that would last for generations, a family built on the foundation of their devotion to each other, a community enriched by their kindness and generosity. The cowboy had found her singing lullabies to calves. He had known she would sing their children to sleep. And she had, blessing not only their children but their children's children and beyond with the gift of her voice and the depth of her love. It was a good ending to a beautiful story, proof that love, real love, never truly ends. It simply transforms, becoming part of everything it touches, echoing through time like a lullaby sung in a barn on a long-ago afternoon when 2 souls recognized each other and began the journey toward home.